Hello, and welcome to LASFS Spotlight, an activity of the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society, this world's oldest science fiction club. The story of the LASFS is the story of its members, because LASFS is an all-volunteer organization and exists only through the donations of the time and talents of its members. I recently sat down with one of those members, Marty Cantor, longtime science fiction reader, fan editor and writer, and member of LASFS for a number of years, to talk about his time with the club. Hello, Marty. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Now, as I understand it, when you first discovered the LASFS, you were working as a tobacconist.
That is correct. I had my own store in Monrovia.
Uh-huh.
And it was a very slow day. And I was sitting in back of the counter and I was reading a science fiction book. And June Moffat's son, Jerry, I believe, came in and he saw I was reading this science fiction book and he mentioned the LASFS to me. Now, I hadn't been in Monrovia very long. Actually, I was living in Duarte, and I was new there also. So I didn't have much of a social life. It was mostly the store 9 days a week, it seemed. So I went over to the LASFS on a Thursday night, and I was hooked. And I have barely missed a meeting since, usually because I've been out of town at a convention. But of course, that science fiction was not new to me. It was fandom that was new to me. I started reading science fiction books back sometime in the 1940s. And there weren't many, but I read them all at the time. And I got into doing many other things, but early on, most people seem to have found fandom in their teens, early 20s. And I was about 40 when I finally found fandom.
Uh-huh.
Though I think I've made up for it since in fanzines. I've created not quite 1,600 of them. Mostly small ones for APA-L, but also for LASFAPA every month, and a few other things that I do for the club and for the pleasure of doing them.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the early things I started with when I found the club, not only the interesting people, but I got absolutely hooked into APA-L, the Amateur Press Associations, which turns out, as I discovered later, was new to fandom in 1937 when FAPA, Fantasy Amateur Press Association, was founded, but basically started soon after the Civil War by printers and journalists who were busy showing off their new fonts and things that they could do.
Yes, yes.
And I think in your intro you basically said what APAs were.
Well, that's for another show.
Yeah,
so.
okay. Okay. Well, basically, you have somebody who's in charge of an APA, and everybody who's a member or a contributor to an APA contributes X number of copies, the same number from everybody, to a central mailer or a person who is in charge, puts them together so that everybody gets back the same thing. They get to read what everybody else has contributed. Mm-hmm. So it turns out to be basically what I've called a conversation in print.
Yes.
Sometimes it's called a cocktail party in print. But it's a lot of fun. APA-L's been going for a long time. And I got into APAs. I eventually got into what were known as genzines, the general fanzine. Came out with one in 1980 called Holier Than Thou, and it turns out that it made the Hugo Best Fanzine shortlist in 1984, 85, and 86. I didn't win in any of those years, but I was one of the top 5 and made the list.
Uh-huh.
They're basically like you might call a magazine like Life or Look or Time magazine, whatnot, but basically people contribute articles, and then I was one who really liked the interaction, so I had big letter columns. In fact, one of my issues had a 52-page letter column.
Wow.
Of course, I love responding to what was being said, and being a smartass, I had lots of things to say. But that was something that eventually I didn't lose interest in, but it got to be too much work, because in those days it was done on Mimeo machines. And I love to do well by the people who contributed illustrations, artwork, whatever. So I just produced lots of them in each issue. And with Mimeo, what you do is you cut a hole where you want the illustration, you paste it in, and hope it doesn't leak too much when you're running the hand crank machine. But I would have 2 or 3 dozen pieces of art in every issue. And it was kind of fun, but it got to be too much work. And thank God, as it were, for the computers that came along.
Yes,
I finally I got my first computer in 1997, and I started producing a zine called No Award. Well, of course, I didn't win an award back with Holier Than Thou, so it was kind of a bittersweet title. This was smaller, but much easier to produce, and I still theoretically produce it, but it's been a long time.
I understand, well, I remember that you've done some international traveling as a science fiction fan.
Yes, I have. Not much, but some. When I was married, Robbie and I was my wife at the time, we ran for the Down Under Fan Fund. That basically is a fund which people vote for those who are running, and the person who wins goes down to Australia, New Zealand if you have the time, spends a couple of weeks, goes to at least one convention down there, and then travels around meeting fans and having a hell of a good time. So Robbie and I won in 1985, and we spent 2 weeks in Australia. Now, there's something you have to do when you win this award. The next year, there's somebody from down under comes up to North America. So the fund, even though it's entirely voluntary, is run by an administrator at the southern end and an administrator up here for 2 years, until somebody else wins from your side of that big ocean, and then they take over as administrators. So for 2 years, Robbie and I won Duff. We also did visit England to the World Convention in 1987, but a nice thing that happened, because I believe we won Duff, we were asked to be fan guests of honor at the Norwestcon's Alternicon, that's up in Seattle. And we had a very nice time with some very nice people up there over a long weekend, and they paid for everything, flew us up and flew us back, and we met more nice people. So yeah, I've done a little bit of traveling.
Yes. And you're active on the LASFS's board of directors now, aren't you?
Yes, I am. It seems that at the time, well, I've had an interest in LASFS, of course, since I've found the club. And they really didn't have any members of the board who wanted to be a secretary. And so I ran and said, hey, I'll take the minutes. And since I was running the club's monthly newsletter called De Profundis, I was doing the minutes myself. So I wound up getting on the board, and it's now been 2 years, I guess, a year and a half, that I've been on the board as secretary. And the club actually decided, for various reasons, to give up De Profundis. And I felt the club really needed a newsletter, so I asked them if they would give it to me, and they did. And now I produce De Profundis every month, just like it used to be, and run it just the way it used to be. I enjoy fan publications. It's fun.
Yes. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up, but we will be having you again back. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And thank all of you for joining us. We hope to see you again soon, because you never know who's going to shine in the LASFS Spotlight.